Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. My name is Farheen Khan. I'm the Executive Director of Meal Exchange. I want to take a moment to welcome you all to the next episode of Food is Life, a Real Talk series. This week, we're looking forward to having a really great conversation with both our co-host and our special guest for the afternoon. So let me go ahead and first introduce our co-host, Sanjana Sharma. Sanjana was on the show a few weeks ago talking about the experience of students and the impact of food on students. So I'm really excited to have Sanjana co-host the session with us today. So let me go ahead and introduce her, and then Sanjana will introduce our main guest for the afternoon. So Sanjana is a leader of both the Meal Exchange chapter and coordinator of the Students Feeding Change project, which is a project of Meal Exchange at Lakehead University. Sanjana developed an intense connection with food early in life, and Sanjana is a leader for the student community in Thunder Bay. From organizing events and running the local Meal Exchange chapter at Lakehead, Sanjana's goal is to bring good food to the campus and to help build a more connected community of people who care about food, where it comes from, and who has access to it. So welcome, Sanjana, and thanks for coming back to the show.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Wonderful. Well, so maybe you can do the honors then and go ahead and introduce our special guest for today.
Yes, I'm really excited about that. So Paul M. Taylor is the Executive Director of FoodShare Toronto, Canada's largest food security organization. Before taking the helm at FoodShare, Paul was the Executive Director of two community-based organizations in Vancouver. He has also served as Chair of the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, board member at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives BC office, and member of the Raise the Rates BC Steering Committee. He currently serves as Vice Chair of Food Secure Canada. Growing up materially poor has inspired much of Paul's activism as a tireless anti-poverty and right to food champion.
Okay, welcome, Paul.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh,
yes, exactly. We know you have a lot happening and you've been really busy, so we appreciate taking the time to be here with us today.
So, when the opportunity presented itself, I was more than
there seems to be a bit of a technical difficulty. You just froze there, Paul. Do you want to say that again?
Okay. I was just saying that I'm a huge fan of Meal Exchange's work and the student leaders across the country. So I was really honored to be invited on today. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. I'm really excited to dive into the questions that we have here for you because we want to learn so much more about you and your work. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead with the first question. So Paul, just tell us a bit about yourself, your work at FoodShare, and how that has evolved because of COVID-19.
Okay, big question. I guess the first thing I'll say a little bit about me, and if I freeze, just let me know and I'll just repeat something. I don't mind. A bit about me, one of the things I'm beginning to realize is that I'm a bit of an eternal optimist. So I approach pretty much everything I do with the belief that change is possible, and I'm willing to do what I can or what I feel I have a responsibility to do to bring about that change. Part of the reason I'm so committed to the work that my colleagues and I do at FoodShare is because I grew up in Toronto. I was materially poor. Growing up as a poor, Black, queer kid, presented a whole host of challenges and opportunities. For my family, we struggled a fair bit. For large portions of my childhood, we were without heat, without hot water, electricity, and sometimes food. Our family was on welfare. And I think that shaped a lot of my experiences around how the decisions that policy or the impact that policy has on people's lives. So I'm no longer hungry or poor anymore, but I still remain focused on, the systems that foisted poverty, hunger, and ultimately the shame that we bestow on people who are materially poor. really working to challenge those systems. So that's a little bit about me. When it comes to FoodShare, so the organization that I work at, one of the things I love about our work is we work alongside community to develop community food assets. And when I say, community food assets, I really mean community food assets. So we're talking about things from produce markets to community gardens, urban farms, school food programs, a bunch of community food programs. But I think one thing that ties them all together is that they're led by the community. So if I can say a little bit about how we, or maybe before I do, I'll say that, my colleagues and I are really committed to challenging food insecurity and poverty in a number of ways. So we have programs, but also including through our advocacy work. So I can talk a little bit now about, if it's helpful, around COVID-19 and how we pivoted. So one of the things FoodShare operates is a social enterprise called the Good Food Box. So folks can jump online, order a Good Food Box, and it gets delivered to their home for as low as $16. Once the pandemic hit, we said, oh my goodness, people are really struggling with whether or not they should be going to grocery stores. Grocery stores have limited hours, long lineups, and folks with compromised immune systems had, additional difficulty with accessing food. So what we did is we started to raise money and partnered with about 80 groups across the city, predominantly groups with smaller budgets or who have limited capacities to fundraise. And we started to provide to these 80 groups through these relationships free good food boxes, so boxes filled with fresh produce to the folks that they work with who were struggling during the pandemic. And then we also took a look at our work and thought about, okay, what do we need to do to be able to do this work well? Well, from the get-go, we recognized that the folks that were doing this, especially the packing, leaving their homes, who we were expecting to leave their homes and pack and deliver produce, they were our essential workers. So we introduced a $4 an hour increase in pay that continues to this day, stocked up, as many groups have, on an ample supply of PPE, provided info on the right to refuse unsafe work to our colleagues, provided good food boxes to all of our staff who were worried about where to get food and how to get food, did things like increasing the number of sick days for anyone that needed to self-quarantine. We added 10 sick days, introduced flexible work schedules, and things like that. And that's allowed us to distribute, as a result of their efforts, has allowed us to distribute close to 500,000 pounds of fresh produce since the middle of March across the city.
That's incredible. That's wonderful. It's always such a challenge, right? To be able to, with Meal Exchange as well, we've had to do such pivoting too. And I know, you and I have talked about this, Paul, like we're certainly not the experts on coordinating boxes, but we did our best to try and support communities across Canada as well. And we're lucky that we had that support with FoodShare in Toronto.
Yeah, we were really pleased to partner with Meal Exchange. And, one of the things that, was really clear about the groups that we partnered with, which was really exciting, is I think whether we realized it or not, we were collectively saying that when people are struggling, leftover food is not, we want to aim higher than leftover food. We want to focus on making sure that people have access to fresh, affordable, fresh, beautiful produce that's nourishing. So we're really pleased to partner with groups like Meal Exchange.
That's great. Well, can you tell us what are some of the major issues around food justice that you're seeing in the food system and in the food movement itself? Because I know that particularly around COVID, we've started to see some of those gaps emerge, right?
Mm-hmm. So diving into the meaty stuff. Here we go. So some of the challenges. I'll be frank. It's racism and it's white supremacy. And to be honest, it's only been rather recently that some organizations, particularly white-led organizations, have engaged this conversation a little bit around racism and white supremacy and the impact that it has. Many, if I'm honest, have refused to acknowledge racism and white supremacy as an issue. One of the things FoodShare did is we recognized that there was really a lack of research that looked at the interconnections of food insecurity and poverty. Food insecurity and racism. anti-Black racism in particular. So we partnered with Proof out of the University of Toronto and, uncovered some really startling things, and I think that research has really spurred a lot of other conversations. We learned that, Black folks in Canada are 3.5 times more likely to be food insecure than white folks. 12% of white children live in food insecure households versus 36% of Black children. Many of us, may have sensed those things, maybe didn't have the specific numbers, but I think some of the other things that we learned through this research really was really quite startling. So things like, when we look at food insecurity stats across the country, and in most countries, someone owns a home, they're typically less likely to be food insecure. Well, our research found that that actually isn't the case for Black Canadians, because Black Canadians experience about the same level of food insecurity as white renters. So Black homeowners and white renters experience same levels, about 14% food insecurity. We tried to tease out what was causing this, and we found it didn't matter immigration status, where someone was born, what the family composition was. So it just really reinforced for us like how deeply embedded racism is in all of our systems, including our food system. And we also know that the food system relies on migrant agricultural workers, largely from Mexico and the Caribbean, to work on Canadian farms, harvesting our local produce that we love in incredibly risky situations. And often, and there are very few legal protections for these workers. They're shackled to a single employer, no access to EI, CPP, despite paying into these things, no minimum wage, overtime, vacation or holiday pay. All of those sorts of things, we ask ourselves, why do we allow that? Why do we allow that to happen? Not to mention that often these folks are working in situations where it's incredibly crowded, there's a lack of PPE, and most recently, we have the Premier of Ontario telling migrant agricultural workers that they should still go to work if they test positive for the virus, but are asymptomatic. This to me is just so evident. And there's so many other ways in which racism and the need to prioritize food justice in our approach to doing this work around food is critical.
Absolutely.
It's so good to know that we have so many studies going on to understand how deeply embedded racism is. I think that really helps us understand the gravity of this issue in so many countries. So I'm so glad you're a part of this work, Paul.
Thank you. And maybe if I can add one other piece, it's that also, I tell everybody who will listen, because I see this thing, I go for walks in the morning every day practically for my mental health, and the bus passes by, the streetcar passes by, I look inside that bus and I'm thinking about who is it who's forced to take the risk, who can't stay home and make sourdough bread. And what I typically see is I see Black and brown women on those buses, who are leaving their families, who know that it's risky to leave the home. So again, I also think, our food system doesn't value low-wage work done by Black and brown folks, and often predominantly women.
I really agree with that. And it's really sad to say that. Now I'm interested in learning what FoodShare has been doing about that. So my question is, how does FoodShare work to center food justice in their work? How have you responded to the recent global movements around anti-racism? Okay.
So we've done a few things, and I think this work started before I was at FoodShare. I've only been at FoodShare for 3 years. But I think, we really recognize how important it is to place equity at the center of our work, especially racial equity, if we're doing work around food justice. It's just, it's key. We've got lots more to do, but I think one of the things that inspires me is my colleagues and I were committed to aiming high and chipping away as best we can. So a few things that we've done, we recognize that income inequality is significant. I don't like to talk in terms of GDP, but when you look at GDP growth, workers are receiving next to nothing in terms of that growth, while CEOs and shareholders are making tons. So, we really need to challenge income inequality more broadly, but also internally within our organization, within our institutions. So what FoodShare did, one of the things we did is not too long ago, we introduced a new pay grid that provided a 25% increase to the lowest paid folks on our team with no increase for senior management. And part of that is recognizing that in the food movement, in food organizations, in nonprofit organizations, it is typically Black and brown folks who occupy those low wage positions in our organizations. So we did that. And then we also, to try and, again, challenge income inequality, we introduced lowest paid to highest paid ratio. So our lowest paid worker at FoodShare, and there's about 150 of us at this point, our highest paid worker, the executive director, can make no more than 3.7 times what the lowest paid worker is. And we know that in nonprofit organizations, in businesses, there are CEOs that make much, much more. And it means enshrining that ratio means that, in order for our salaries to grow, everyone's salaries has to grow. So we're kind of bound in that way. We also do things like not negotiating salaries as part of the hiring process. You don't get paid more at FoodShare just because society has been designed for you or because your work is more likely to be seen. We're really trying to focus on equal pay for equal work. And again, lots of this stuff is what we do internally. It's not the stuff that funders get super excited about or want to fund, but it's like so critical to our work. I'll maybe share one other piece. It's we introduced a no interest emergency loan of up to $2,000 for our colleagues. And it's often to assist with first and last month's rent. And they decide how much they're going to pay back, how long it'll take for them to pay it back. But as rent rises in this city, and we see more and more kind of payday lenders pop up, we want to make sure that we're supporting our colleagues in the ways that we can. And maybe I'll just add one other piece that we've done really recently to dismantle the white supremacy that exists in local food, or our attempt to do that is we leverage our bulk buying power. And we've launched something called the Dismantling White Supremacy Good Food Box that someone can order online. And its produce is in that box that's been produced by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color led farms or owned farms. So, some of the ways in which we're kind of embedding our thinking around food justice in our work, but we do have a lot ways to go still.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Thank you for doing all that work. It's incredibly important, and you're right. Sometimes it's not the it's that kind of work often is not funded or given the kind of credence that it should be, but it's certainly still essential. And the Good Food Box that you've introduced is also very important to really help put Black-owned, Black-led organizations at the forefront, right, in terms of produce development. So that's really great.
Absolutely.
So for another question for you, so we know in the work that we do often that working to address food insecurity, the solutions are not really long-term or sustainable. Often they fail to address kind of the root causes of food insecurity. And we know that FoodShare has recently joined this Global Solidarity Alliance for Food, Health, and Social Justice. Could you maybe tell us more about that? And perhaps how it challenges like short-term food charity responses?
Absolutely. So we're, as sometimes these things form, a group of people at a conference get together and say, wait a minute, we have some philosophical alignment here. So we're really pleased to have been one of the founding members of the Global Solidarity Alliance. It's a newly formed group, made up of organizations in, more materially rich countries that are pushing back against the entrenchment of charity as our default response to things like poverty and food insecurity in this country. We know that, there was something that happened in the 1980s where early 1980s, as part of kind of entrenching neoliberalism and the retrenchment of the state in addressing poverty and food insecurity, we actually transitioned as a country away from income-based interventions and adopted food-based interventions. And that's when we saw the explosion of food banking and food charities. FoodShare ourselves was started in 1985. So this group, we're really working to advance the right to food, not the right to leftovers, not the right to food-like substances, and we recognize that some of that work really needs to happen with our bureaucrats in this country, because as part of our right to food in Canada, which the US doesn't have because they didn't ratify it, but as part of our right to food, there's something called the Periodic Review to the United Nations, where every 5 years we're meant to provide an update on how we're doing on the progressive realization of the right to food. And our bureaucrats talk about charity, the food banking model, but not about work actually advancing the right to food that creates the conditions that allow people to access the food that they need for themselves, their families, and their communities now and into the future. So I think we were working together to, in essence, say, politicians, you need to stop showing up for photo ops to sort tins at food charities and instead, sort the public policy that we need to address these issues.
Yeah, well said. I just thank you for saying that. That's very important. We need to go beyond the photo ops for sure and actually start talking about policy and trying to make the right kind of changes that are significant, right? I mean, we know that those things take time, but we've got to find the internal ambassadors and supporters, to the allies, to be able to help push that along. I hear that for sure.
And we even have not to go on with this, but we have a provincial government, if we're talking about government's responsibilities around advancing the right to food, that rolled back the planned increase to minimum wage. That would have had so much more of an impact on people's ability to purchase the food that they need than any donation. Food banks are doing what they can, so I'm not knocking food banks, but we really need our governments to do more and take this issue seriously. So it's a group of us in different rich countries saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not the way to go. We've seen what's happened in Canada and the US and in the UK, and there are other countries that are just beginning these conversations and starting to see food charities explode. So really trying to push back and say, there's other things, there's another conversation that needs to be had here.
That's great.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this particular answer because I see similar things happening here in Thunder Bay, and I really look forward to people who are actually caring about the long-term solution. So thanks for sharing that. It's really motivating and inspiring that people are willing to talk about this.
And, I might be the person here today, but I work with a team of people that are, I see my Good Food box being delivered right now. But I work with a team of people, including the person delivering, my colleague here, delivering my Good Food box, who are just as committed to this work. So I feel really fortunate to work alongside a team that is just as committed.
That's fantastic.
So Paul, I had another question for you. FoodShare is doing some great work in supporting BIPOC communities. What can student leaders take away from your work to create more spaces for BIPOC on their campuses?
What can student leaders take away? I think central to this kind of question or approach is that this work can't happen without us. And I love the name of this, the Real Talk series, because I'm happy to really talk real talk, and I think the solutions that we need, I think, can't be designed simply by well-intentioned white folks alone. It has to be centered on the experiences of the folks that we know are most affected by the issue. I think we have to. Oh yeah, hello, did I? Oh yeah. I think we have to go beyond notions of diversity. It's not enough to be a token Black or Indigenous or person of color at a table of all white people. Those spaces, in my experience, aren't always safe. I've witnessed the ferocity, I've received the ferocity of white anger in response to challenging business as usual and the status quo of white supremacy. So I think that's critical. And I would say, lastly, racial justice work, equity work has to be appropriately resourced. Don't rely or expect free labor from BIPOC folks, to carry the weight of dismantling white supremacy. It's not something that we created in the first place.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And I think, just in my little experience here, if I can add something to that, is just to say that, there is a lot of work that needs to happen, and we need to stick together when we're doing the work, because it can be very isolating and also demoralizing at times, right? And as much as sometimes white folks are intentional, their intentions are good, they're still not fully aware in some ways, or there's some ignorance still. And so it's also important, I think, for allies, right, and white folks to also recognize that they don't always have all the answers, and they're not the experts in everything. Just as an example, I spoke to somebody recently, and they were of the opinion that New Canadians meant all BIPOC people, and it was like, well, no, so it, and these people are pretty high up in the sector, so it's just a great reminder to tell all of us, right, that we're not always the experts, and as much as our intentions are important, the impact is also significantly important, right? And it's just how it's received.
Absolutely. And I'm a real talk, I've really appreciated the thoughtful way in which you've reached out to me, around everything that's happening and checking in. I've really appreciated that, and really appreciate having you in the space and in the movement. So thank you.
Thanks so much. So we're approaching the end, but we've got one other question for you that we'd like to hear from you about. So given all that's happened over the last few months, what do you see are sources of hope or opportunity for a more just future?
Okay. So I guess I'm still processing, I think, the last few months a little bit. What I've spent more time processing, I think, is the oppression that Black and Indigenous people have faced for over 400 years. I think what's happening right now, or as I begin to process what's happening right now, is I think that more white people are recognizing some of the significant systemic inequities faced by Black and Indigenous people and other people of color. Things from poverty to homelessness to food insecurity, police brutality, educational outcomes, incarceration rates, and it could go on and on and on. So am I hopeful? It's a bit strange, it's a bit bittersweet to say this, but yes, I am hopeful, because I think one of the things white supremacy means is that things don't change until white folks think that they should. So I think we need to actually dismantle white supremacy so that we don't have to wait for white folks in order for change to occur on issues that are critical to our survival. I don't want to have to wait or even beg, for example, a predominantly white city council to defund the police. I don't want to beg a predominantly white provincial legislature to halt evictions, largely of Black and brown folks. I don't want to beg a predominantly white parliament to prioritize Indigenous sovereignty and addressing anti-Black racism and poverty and food insecurity. And I really think it's time for white supremacy to end. It needs to go into our history books. And I think more and more folks like myself, we're not willing to wait any longer, and we're not interested in being polite or, being overly sensitive to white fragility. There's work that has to be done. People are at risk, significant risk, and we need to do something. We need to address a crisis as if we're in crisis moment. So.
Thank you for all of that. It's like you said, it's so important. This is the time for us to start to see those changes happen. And it's just we can't wait any longer, for sure. So do you have any other last sort of thoughts for the audience that you'd like to share before we go?
Yeah, I just want to, if I can, a plug for, Meal Exchange. I think there are, we do need to look at, there is data that says that, white-led organizations, just have to think about in your mind, what are the largest nonprofit organizations that I know? And they're often white-led, and they're often, the bigger the budget, it's likely a white man. So, I think one of the things people need to be doing is putting their dollars where their appetite for change is, and supporting organizations led by BIPOC folks, especially led by women. So I really encourage folks to support the awesome work that Meal Exchange is doing.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet. Appreciate that. We definitely don't have enough people in positions of power in the sector of color. So we're so grateful that, you're at FoodShare and that you're taking such a great lead in this movement around food justice and race and anti-Black racism and all the incredible work that you're doing. Very fortunate to have you in the sector. And so thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. Farheen and Sanjana, thank you. It's great to meet you, Sanjana.
Thank you. You as well.
Thanks so much, Paul. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
You bet. Love that. Bye now.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Great. That was such a great conversation, Sanjana. My goodness, we've learned so much.
Yeah, I learned so much from this conversation. I was really looking forward to this. So thank you for having me here, Farheen.
For sure. Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to have student leaders come on, and you've added so much value to the conversation. So, thanks for being so thoughtful and putting together some of the questions, and being able to really deliver on asking those incredible questions that have given us such a gift today with respect to learning so much about food justice and anti-Black racism. So, thanks again for being on the show, and hopefully we'll bring you on again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Okay, everyone. So thanks so much for being on the show again this week. We had such a great conversation with Paul Taylor and with Sanjana Sharma, the student leader. It's so nice to be able to see our young leaders starting to step up as well, and they continue to do, but it's great to see them in a public way in this way. So glad that you were able to all join us. I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. So until then, take care, and we'll see you again soon.